Good afternoon, ladies. We're going to be painting a similar painting to this. This was my practice painting that I did just to figure out colors and, I don't know, logistics, etc. So the one that we're going to do actually includes a little house or barn or whatever you want to call that. I'm not even sure. You could do it with or without. So it's up to you if you want to do the house or if you want to leave the house out. I will have given you a line drawing at class, so you can go ahead and trace that or copy it or whatever you want to do. Keep the house in, take the house out, up to you. The colors that we're going to use today are cobalt for the sky. We're going to use sap and burnt umber for this background area. The trees, I used warm sepia. You could use sepia with a little bit of burnt umber to warm it up if you don't have warm sepia. The shadows are ultramarine blue, so that's these guys here. And then I used burnt umber for the sticks and cadmium red for the berries. So we'll go over all of this in class as well, but those are the colors that I used. So the first thing that we're going to do is trace out or draw out our background, of course. And then we're going to paint the sky. And then while the sky is still wet, we're going to bleed these browns and greens in so they sort of mute up into the sky. So it's not a harsh line. We're looking for a nice bleed. And I did do it section by section so that you can go through it methodically and not feel like you're rushing too much. So we're going to go ahead and start that way. I did use my new long round 8. I don't know if that's showing up or not. I like this brush a lot. This is one of the ones I bought at Christmas time. And we're going to do wet on dry with a very, very watered down cobalt blue. So we don't want too much paint. We want like a nice light daytime sky. So a lot of water, a little bit of pigment. And we're going to start by going around all of these trees, section by section, and just bringing the blue all the way down to the horizon line. So there's one section up to the trees. It's a little wet, so we'll just move on to another one maybe. Plenty of water. One nice light sky. This is supposed to be sort of a sunny day. So light, bright sky. Not cloudy, not dark, not gray. Although, you know, you could change it up if you wanted to. If you're in a gray mood, you could certainly use grays in the sky. But this is what I used. So just a nice light wash of cobalt blue. So let's start with those two to begin with, those two sections. And then I have my burnt umber and my sap green ready to go. So with the burnt umber, I'm just adding sort of a line at the bottom and then pulling that up into sort of tree-like forms. So we're not looking for actual trees, we're just looking for tree-like forms. And if your paper dries before it starts to mix, you can just bring some clear water down into it just to sort of blend it a little bit. And then right on top of that, you're going to go with the sap green. So you're going to add a little bit of sap green on top of that. The green's going to start mixing with the brown. It's going to become a dirtier green color. And you're just basically going to let that sit and do its thing. I kind of came up with little points of sort, you know, so that they looked like they were treetops or maybe pine trees or something like that. So you don't want a line, you want sort of a jagged edge. And that one is done, so we're going to go ahead and move on to this area of sky, which is just sky. So this I'm just going to fill in with blue. Let's not forget this little triangle there. So this I'm just going to fill in with blue. And if it gets too dark, like, so you want your sky to match the section next to it. So if it gets too dark, you can just dab some of that paint off your brush and take it off of the paper with a thirsty brush or paper towel so that your sky sections sort of match in color. So now I'm going to go into the next section, which is again another area where I'm going to put these tree colors. So just dragging this color down. And if you go over the tree lines that you drew, not a big deal. The sepia is much darker than the blue, and it will cover anything that sort of flows over into it. So that's not a huge deal at all. I'm going to take a little bit of this up. In fact, I'm going to do the next section too because it's very, very watery. So we'll do two sections at once maybe. So this one's going down to the house. So we're going to have to go around the house a little bit. The roof is going to remain white. So we do want to be careful with painting around the roof as much as possible to keep that white because that will be snow covered. And so the white will be the snow. So just do your best to try to go around that. So I have those two sections done. I'm going to go into my burnt umber again. Add a little bit more. Ooh, that got pretty dark pretty fast. And these can bleed up a little bit taller since they're next to the house. So if you want to end up doing some bleed above the house, then your trees on this side of this tree would maybe want to be a little bit taller so that it makes sense that you have a little bit of brown coming up from behind the house. Like that. All right, so that's maybe like a taller tree. And then I'm going to go back with the sap on top of that. Drag it up if necessary. All right, and then just let that kind of do its thing also. And move on. More cobalt. You could use cerulean too if you don't have cobalt. Cerulean would be a really great substitute for the sky. Just maybe not ultramarine, because first of all, we're using ultramarine for the shadows, so that would be the same blue, which wouldn't be terrible, but it's just maybe not quite as interesting. And second of all, cerulean tends to be a much colder sky, where in my mind anyway, I'm going for more of a sunny sky, maybe after a snow, or whatever the case. So again, we're on top of the roof here, so if you want to continue this bleed, you can add a little bit, oops, that's a lot of water. Add a little bit of brown at the top here. I got some on the roof too, which is what I told you to be careful of. All right, so we can just pull that up a little bit, let it bleed a little bit. For some trees. Add a little bit of green to that. And if the trees are slightly different color from the other ones, it's okay, because we're not looking for a uniform stand of trees. We're looking for sort of like a random foresty type of look, right? All right, so we'll leave those be. This piece I drew really skinny, so that's going to be a quick little swoosh down between these trees. And I got a little bit of house to contend with here. So this is a little bit of a tight corner, but if you didn't do the house, then you won't have this much to contend with. I need a little more water in this brown. Okay. Okay, again, here's some brown bleeding up. A little dark, so I'm just sucking some of that up with my brush. This bled over, that's okay, because we're going to cover that with something darker, so it's not a big deal. Little tap of green. Now, because that's a taller area, the area next to it is going to have to match it somewhat. So this section here, and you got to be careful not to bleed across this one, because otherwise you're going to get green and brown bleeding into your sky. So this is a pretty narrow area. If you wanted to stop and give us this section a few minutes to dry before you moved on, you're certainly welcome to do that, so that you don't have any accidental bleed over into that sky with your tree color. Again, a little bit of brown. But because, like I said, this is taller, so I'm going to have to go a little taller with this brown also. Just at least on the side, so that it looks like it kind of matches what's behind that other tree. And the reason that we're doing this wet on wet, this tree part, is so that the trees blend and diffuse into the sky and look like they're in the background, and they're out of focus a little bit. So they're not the focus of the painting, right? The trees in the foreground are really more of the focus. So you want nice diffuse colors here. This green got a little out of control. Taking a little bit of that back. Because what we want is like evergreen colors. We don't want, this is obviously not the time of year where there's leaves on the trees. So the green and the brown is supposed to really mimic like evergreens mixed with maybe deciduous trees that might have some brown leaves left on them, or the sticks that are in the trees, or whatever the case. So you don't want too much green, because you want it to sort of blend and look like this brownish greenish color. Okay, we have several more sections to go. We'll do them kind of quickly. Again, trying to keep your blue similar section to section, so it looks like a cohesive sky and not like a bunch of stained glass panels that are different colors. All right, grabbing a little bit more brown. This could be a little lower. Doesn't have to be the same height as everything else. It could be sort of like bushes rather than big tall trees, right? A little bit of green. We'll leave that be. I'm going to do this last bottom section, and then I'm just going to fill in the sky. This is a teeny weeny section right here. I don't know if you can hear my son in the background. He's in his room with his door closed playing video games, and I'm in my studio with my door closed, but I don't know if you can hear him. So if you can, sorry. All right, last section. A little bit of brown bleed. Lots of water there. I'm just sucking a little bit of that up. A little bit more green. Oops, didn't pick anything up. There we go. A little bit more green. And good. So that's basically our muted background. So while that's drying, we can go ahead and put these ultramarine blue shadows in because they're nowhere near the part that's wet. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to, and this is not a super dark, super saturated blue either. Here, I have my practice paper here next to me that I can test it. So that's probably about where I would like it, right? And it's going to be sort of a brush stroke, like pulling down like that. And I'm going to work left to right so that I don't have to go back over my wet paint again. And I'm going to stay near the trunk because you're only going to get shadows where the tree actually is. So no wider than the trunk, really. And this can be, you know, uneven. Doesn't have to be straight because the snow is probably bumpy, right? So you don't really want a straight line. You want sort of a random type of a line. A little bit of bumpy, a little bit of whatever. Oops, I forgot this one. And try to pull them down on relatively the same angle if you can, because the light source is going to be coming from the same place on all of these, so that you don't want your angles to be different. You want them to be the same so that it looks like everything's coming from the same direction and not from different areas. So this one got a little dark. I'm just going to pat it up a tiny bit. We'll see what happens with this one, maybe a little bit. This is something you can definitely practice on a practice piece before you go to it if you're feeling like it's a little daunting. Because once you put ultramarine down, it's really difficult to get it back up again in its entirety. So if you want to practice it first, you can certainly do that. I'm just going to do this one too while I'm here. So I love this brush, I really do. I love that it has a super duper, that's really dark, super duper thin point, even though it's a fat brush. It's a size 8, which is a pretty fat round brush, but point is so fine that you can do, you know, skinny details and wide brush strokes with like the same brush. So I actually really like that a lot. All right, so we're kind of aiming for similar similar color shadows here. So if some of it gets a little dark, you can suck it up a little bit. If it gets a little light, you can darken it up a little bit so that they're all in the similar shade of this ultramarine blue. This one got a little bit light, so maybe I'm gonna take a tiny bit of paint and just go over it. just to get it in the same range as the other ones. All right, so that's basically our shadows. Now some of these trees, like this one's a Y. So in my mind's eye, of course I'm not working from a picture, but in my mind's eye I'm going to say, well, this is a Y, so at some point this shadow is going to divide a little bit and give me a Y shape to sort of match this Y. So I'm just going to add a little bit more shadow right here. Ooh, that got dark, really dark. And you know what, honestly, it's not a huge deal. Nobody's going to be looking at your artwork and going, but that doesn't match that. But, you know, if you're interested in realism, if you're interested in observation, you know, if you were out looking at trees and shadows on the outside, you would see that every branch had its own shadow. So those would equate together. So you could do it, you could not do it. Either one is fine. So there's your shadows. And this is still pretty wet up here. So we can't do the trees just yet, because if we start putting the sepia, the warm sepia in on the trees, it's going to start bleeding in this background. So what I am going to do is I'm going to leave it like this. I'm going to turn the video off. I'm actually going to blow dry it, but whether you blow dry it or whether you just let it dry on its own, which would be fine too, and then we'll come back and we will move on. Oh, actually, I just realized, there's sky up here I have to finish. Let me do that too. It is a little bit like painting stained glass, because you're painting all of these negative spaces in between these branches. And so they're basically their own shapes. But that also makes it a little bit easier to manage, because you're working with smaller areas instead of a large area all at one time. So that's why I thought this would be a great painting to do, because you can do each section sort of on its own and not feel so rushed that, oh my gosh, I have to do all of these things while the paint is still wet. No, you could just do each little section. Move on when it's done. Go to the next section. Move on when that one's done. And again, if you go over the tree lines, these lines that you drew for your trees, it's no problem. The sepia is more than dark enough to cover up this light blue that you're putting on here. So they're just like guidelines. They're not absolute at all. All right, so there's the rest of my sky that I forgot to do. So at this point, I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to blow dry it, and I will come back and hopefully finish the rest of the painting up. Or at least mostly, anyway. And then we'll talk about it again on Tuesday as well. Okay.